Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I'm sitting in Geyserville in the Dry Creek Valley with Julie Pedroncelli and her husband, Ed St. John of Pedroncelli Cellars. Welcome, Julie, Ed. Tell us a little bit about the winery, where we are, and the history of this place.
Well, it all began when my grandparents, Giovanni and Julia Pedroncelli, purchased a piece of property here near the town of Geyserville in Dry Creek Valley in 1927, so 91 years ago. And they purchased a piece of a shuttered winery because it was the middle of a dry time here in the U.S. During Prohibition, and 25 acres of Zinfandel and a home. And so they basically survived that particular dry time by selling the grapes to head of households who could apply for and receive their license to produce 200 gallons of wine, which equals to 84 cases. So I think there were a lot of happy families during that, quote, dry time in this area. And they basically, when Prohibition ended, when repeal occurred, they went into the wine business, basically dusted off the equipment, worked with the vineyard that they had, then set up for the next 90 years, which basically was adding more land, more vineyard, increasing the size of the winery over the years, going to second and now third generation family members, even into the fourth, actually. So they basically started that. And we've just continued that wonderful heritage they started right here in our little spot in Dry Creek Valley.
That's great. So now you're second generation or third generation?
I'm third generation.
Third generation. And what is your total acreage today, and both that you have as well as what's planted? And are you making wine from any other vineyards or anything else?
We farm 100 acres of vineyard. We own a total of 180. That produces about 50% of our production, and the other half comes from growers within 14 miles of where we're sitting right now. So very regionally focused.
And of course, we're in Dry Creek Valley, which is very famous for its Zinfandel. In addition to Zinfandel, what else do you grow here, and what other wines are you producing?
Well, Zinfandel obviously is one of our flagships. We consider the other flagship Cabernet Sauvignon. We have 33 acres of Zinfandel and 30 acres of Cabernet planted here, but we also include the only white wine varietal we grow here is Sauvignon Blanc, which is another Dry Creek Valley kind of wonderful grape to grow, as well as a smattering of others. We have Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Petit Syrah, a little Syrah, and we even have Portuguese varietals. Really? Sometimes, if I take people to the top of the hill just above where we're sitting, I'll say it's the United Nations of Vineyards, because we even have Sangiovese planted here. So we have a little of something planted over that total of 100 acres of vineyard here.
Wow. And your total case production, Ed?
We're at about 60,000 cases. We grow 12 different varieties here on the two ranches, so it's quite a United Nations of growing. Dry Creek Valley is wonderful for that. If you're very site-specific, you have quite the ability to plant and grow successfully in a number of different varieties from various regions in the world.
And where can people generally find your wines? Are you direct-to-consumer or distribution?
We do both. We are nationally distributed and internationally as well, but primarily independent retail, restaurants. Probably 40-50% of our wine is sold in restaurants. We enjoy food and wine together, and we think others do as well, so it seems to be where the wine shines. And then direct-to-consumer, absolutely, good old-fashioned www. And so it's available that way as well. We're a very low-key, easygoing. We love the wine lifestyle and like to share it with others.
So, Julie, I know you grew up here in Healdsburg, in the town of Healdsburg, just a few miles down the road. And Ed, what area did you grow up in?
And we actually both were raised here in Dry Creek Valley. Julie and I met on the school bus in kindergarten. So we have quite a history here.
That's adorable. Okay, so many of my questions, you might have the same answer since you've basically grown up together. But starting with you, Julie, what is your first memory relevant to wine?
Well, I remember actually wine in a Dino cup. When I was around 4 years old, we were living in the town of Hillsburg, and my dad would bring bottles of wine home, and I always wanted to try the wine. The unfortunate thing is they always added a lot of water to it. So I basically would ask for, no water, and basically they would water it down anyway, just so they could be do the right thing with their children. But that's kind of where my passion for wine began, and passion for the family business as well. It took a few more years going through school and and coming back and working, but I've now been doing this for 33 years, working for the family business.
Wow. And do you remember your first relevant memory to wine?
Oh, my first relevant memory, actually, not surprisingly, is with Pedroncelli. My father's family had an old American plan resort up in the mountains above Napa Valley. And we used to stop here in the early 60s, pick up wine, and take it up to my dad's cousin that she would serve with dinner there. And I remember coming here and my dad and Julie's grandfather visiting in the cellar and things like that. It's sort of funny to have that same memory, but, when you grew up in the same little neighborhood. So
yeah. Now, obviously, the very first wine or first memory you have is not the best wine you've ever had, but do you remember or do you recall what that most significant wine that you've ever drunk is? And do you remember the occasion?
I'm going to give you two. Actually, it has to do with how wine and food pair. The first time we had just met and we were having dinner at home, and I made some sort of, I remember it was like a pork tenderloin dish or something, but the important thing is it was with a side of carrots, which is unusual. You don't think about carrots always with wine, but it had kind of a dill sauce with it. And I remember it went so well with our Sauvignon Blanc. And it was like the first time that light came on that like, oh, food and wine pairing. That's what people are, I'd had wine and food all of my life, but it was that moment when it really the light bulb went off. And the other one, of course, is the start of my champagne loving career, is having I was up in British Columbia. We were at a hospitality suite with our agent in Whistler, and he had Pol Roger. And I have been so spoiled ever since because I absolutely love champagne. And that was this wonderful experience, kind of opened a whole new world because it isn't something we produce, but it is something that I'm very passionate about.
And Ed, do you have a memory of that most significant wine that you've ever tried and when it was?
Sure. Since Julie got two, I get two as well. And I would say the food and wine pairing experience, environment has so much to do with your food and wine experience. So I'll give you the food and wine experience, and then I'll give you the environment. I was presenting wines, and the rep asked two buyers to meet us at a restaurant that we were also going to be presenting the wine. And so they were bringing out the food for lunch, and I was presenting the wine, but the two things were not coordinated. The food and the wine wasn't intended to pair, but
it's like your worst nightmare when you're planning a dinner.
It's really hard. It's really hard because you're pouring wine and talking, and the food is showing up, and you're trying to eat and talk and drink, and they're not necessarily paired. But it was an oyster shooter. So it was a shot glass that had some ponzu in the bottom and a raw oyster, and then a little dab of wasabi on the side of the glass, and you shot the oyster down, and it happened to be when I was presenting our rosé. And I tasted the two together, and I was absolutely shocked and amazed at the little party that was happening in my mouth. It was the most amazing experience I'd ever had. Now, the environment. This happened to be at an open-air restaurant in Maui, and it was right on the ocean. So I think it had to do with that and the sea air, and it was just amazing. So that was the food and wine thing. The wine by itself was a 1972 Chateau Yquem that somebody shared one time, and oh my God, I've never tasted anything like that in my life.
Yeah, I love how when I ask you what your most memorable is, of course it's an old wine that you remember, those life-changing wines. But I do agree with the food and wine pairing. When you find that aha moment, it is something that we achieve. We aspire to achieve in every meal that we have. It rarely happens. So you both have traveled the world what is the best foreign wine you've ever drunk?
Well,
probably both can answer the same thing.
1, 2, 3.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, that was pretty nice.
Boy. Well, I have to go back to kind of that Pol Rocher, that it has started just a desire to find like the best of the champagne, what champagne itself has to offer. And it just, again, we always talk about, this is a winery and a family business that I have worked with our wines for a very long time, but it also has opened up an entire other world, meaning all the wonderful wines from everywhere. And of course, we talk about the La Tâche that we had, oh my goodness, in Japan, in the Ginsu district. And it was it was a wow moment as far as how beautiful the wine was and how wonderfully it paired with the sushi that we were having.
Well, speaking of understanding the world of wine that's been open to you, who do you think among all the populations in the world drinks the best in terms of quality?
Californians, of course.
I was going to say my family, but that's not quite a population.
I think wine is so subjective and so personal that I really do think that it is about the situation and the wine at the table and the people around the table and the food on the table more than maybe even the quality of the wine, because I think the quality of the wine elevates to the situation that it's in. I lovingly tell people that the best compliment you could ever give a Pedroncelli was to be sitting at the dinner table with your family and friends, have our wine on the table, reach for the bottle, and the bottle is empty. That it hasn't been the conversation about the wine, it has been a conversation about life. Mm-hmm. And that, we're fortunate enough to be a little part of that conversation.
So I can understand why Julie thinks that the people who drink the best wine anywhere are the Pedroncellis. Are you guys collecting wines? Do you have a cellar?
We do. We have a small cellar. Most of it is stored here in our cellar in the winery. We've collected, in the early years of our marriage, we actually used to do a lot of wine tasting. So we have some jewels in our cellar that we probably should take a look at. But we have some other wines. And I know I have a little grower champagne in there too. And that's one of the things that I like to collect as well.
And do you happen to know sort of the most valuable little gem that might be hidden in that cellar right now, or have you lost track?
Actually, I think the most valuable one is, really short story. Ed used to sell cork from Portugal as one of his major career, and he used to bring port back. And he one year brought me a bottle, and I still haven't had it, but it's from my birth year, 1960. Wow! So that is the jewel in what we have collected.
That's a Colheita, and it's the 40-year tawnies that we have might be a little bit more valuable. But interestingly enough, if you think about wine collection, I would say we are not necessarily wine collectors. We have a few bottles that we have collected over the years, but in terms of seeking out wines and then cellaring them for a long period of time as collectors, no. We've had the wonderful opportunity to be treated to some wines by some collectors. And I've always said, you don't need to own a pickup. You need to have a friend that owns a pickup.
I do understand that. It's good to hang out with people who collect wine. They have the burden of not touching it and saving it, and we have the joy of drinking it. Do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
Yes. The one in my glass.
And Julie, what would you say?
The perfect variety. Wow, I just think it all comes down to the appellation, the winemaker, we talk about site-specific and microclimates, and all of that plays into what makes for the perfect varietal. And I think each and every one has its own spot. And when you start to go global in your head, your mind basically explodes because there are so many possibilities of perfect varietals.
Mm-hmm. So on another thought, those critics out there, what are your thoughts on wine critics and scores?
Well, I see them a lot like movie critics. I think they're really, really good to follow. I think they're good to, because I like to say this too. I think each one of us is our own, or we can be our own critic. I encourage people to try as many wines as possible. With wine critics, what helps is that they've tasted so many wines over their careers that what they're sharing is the culmination of that career, whether it's 30 or 10 or 20 years. They have a palate that I think is a keen palate on wine specifically, but also to take it as a movie critic. I just kind of tried to draw this comparison because maybe a movie critic hates the movie that you absolutely love. And in that way, that's why I say take it with a grain of salt. But I also think there's a lot of wisdom in what they do because they've tasted more wines than I will ever taste. And so I think looking to them for guidance is key.
And I also think if you follow certain critic, maybe choose 2 or 3 critics, follow them, and then determine if you agree or disagree with them. And in so doing, you'll know if you see Bob Smith gives it a 97, you're going to think it's a 63. Mm-hmm. And if Jane Smith gives it a 77, you're going to think it's 103. So you just learn, you calibrate your palate to theirs. And, with what we think of critics, when they give us good scores, we love them.
Logically.
And we'll leave it at that.
Okay, so I'm going to see how compatible the two of you are right now. Here's the question. Red, white, or rosé?
All wine would be red if it could, with the exception of Austrian whites.
Okay.
I would say, for me, white. I would have to just say, and a nice crisp, with everything in balance, of course, but I would just, for me right now, and just to say this, I go through periods where it would have been red. If you'd asked me this 2 years ago, I would have said, well, for sure red, and maybe 4 or 5 would have been rosé. So for now, I'm kind of going through my white period.
Okay, still or sparkling wine?
Ooh, sparkling.
Still.
Champagne or domestic?
Ooh. Oh, well, there's some good domestic ones out there, but I'm going to say champagne since I've been saying that, talking about it nonstop.
So when I asked you guys about your memorable experiences, we both talked about food and wine pairing experiences. What's your general approach to food and wine pairing? Do you believe in following the rules of white wine with fish, red wine with meat? Do you break the rules? Do you think there are rules, no rules? How do you approach that?
We recently did a virtual tasting with some wine friends from across the country online. And one of the recipes that Julie chose to serve was to prepare, and we send the recipe out to everyone to prepare at the same time, was a chicken dish that had, some sort of chili peppers and prunes. Not exactly a white wine dish, not exactly a red wine dish, and it was surprising. It went very well with both Sauvignon Blanc and with Sonoma Classico, which is a red blend that we do, and chicken. So do we follow the rules? No. First. But it is fun. Julie's really good about being able to read a recipe and in her mind think how it's going to pair with the wine. I tend to be a little bit more texture oriented. I can think about a wine's texture, its acidity and things like that, and what that bite of food in my mouth is going to feel like, and how they're going to pair that way. So we work together very well on that.
Yeah. So how do you approach that?
Well, I like to look at obviously the ingredients first, and then how the dish will be cooked, because I think that certain ways of cooking will bring elements out where then I think about the wine going with it, and then the aspects of that wine, whether it's a higher acidity wine or it has deeper tannins or it's more rounded or more fruit forward. So I'll start to kind of focus on how those elements are going to be brought together when you have that glass of wine and that dish in front of you.
So what do you guys think a non-drinker loses out by not tasting your wines?
I think, let's see, a non-drinker. I think they, I don't know about those people. I think we've been talking a lot about a world of wines, and there's a world of tastes out there. And I think if somebody hasn't tried our wines, that there's just something that they haven't experienced yet. And I think encouraging them, like I was saying earlier, the more you taste or the more different wines. In fact, many times, and my family would probably shoot me, but I always just say, drink whatever. I mean, it doesn't even have to be our wine. As long as you're exploring that world of wine, I think that's the most important. But if you haven't tried our wines, I think our wines have the elements that really pair it so well with food. Everything is in balance. Our winemaker she makes certain that there's the acidity, not a lot of fruit, just the right amount of oak. And yes, those things are important, but until you open that bottle of wine and try it, you are missing out.
I would agree with Julie, especially on the last part about the style of wines that we make. And I alluded to it earlier about the wines simply being there as a part of the experience. And I think what we aim to do with the wines, as it's in our culture and our DNA, is in our house style, what we aim to do is simply to enhance the flavor of the food. Our wines tend to be a little bit higher in acid, and that does that. I will tell people that our wines leave you wanting, and I get sort of this inquisitive look on their face. But the point being, you have a sip of our wine and your mouth waters. And when your mouth waters, that's your brain simply saying, I want something more. I want either a bite of food or another sip of wine. So I would say what they're missing out on is just that little bit of elevated experience.
So, space aliens land on your property. Which of your wines are you going to give them?
Zinfandel, of course.
Oh boy, this is like asking, which is your favorite child? and we all know that you have one, you're just not allowed to say it out loud. I'm going to say Sonoma Classico. Sonoma Classico it's a blend, and it's a bit of a tip of the hat to the history of Sonoma County that started out as making table wines, and red blends was what was made here. And it's sort of I tell people it's my Tuesday through Monday wine. You can drink it any day of the week, and it fits in. Now, I will tell you that it's also about 40% Zinfandel. So,
see, Zinfandel. So, you've been here a long time on this property. You grew up on it. You know the area. Do you see vintage variation year to year, or do you see more similarities happening?
The vintage vary from vintage to vintage. I see, it all depends. Again, it goes back to what Mother Nature gives us at the beginning of a vintage. So there are those variations within that, but there are also decisions that we've made here on the property for a particular varietal where it grows best, because just looking out the window right now, I know that there used to be other varietals planted a couple of hillsides over, and we found out that maybe wasn't the right varietal for the right spot. So that also will help kind of tell the story of the vintage, is when you've got the right varietal in the right spot.
Yeah, I would say the variance is actually a positive thing. Stylistically and flavor component wise, the grapes are very, very consistent. But vintage to vintage, they change a lot. And that has to do with if you have a wet year, if you have a dry year, if you have a cool year, if you have a hot year, those things. And that's, as Julie said, that's Mother Nature impacting every region of the world, not just Dry Creek Valley. And I think probably we're fortunate here that we have, the king of weather indicators growing here. It's our predominant grape. It's Zinfandel. Zinfandel is going to tell you the story of the vintage every year. And it's the one, as I said, it's going to be consistent. If you're Dry Creek Valley Zinfandel, you're always going to have spice. You're always going to have fresh cracked black pepper. You're going to get a little bit of clove. But if it's a cool year, it'll lean more toward the floral, violet end of things. And if it's a warm year, you're going to get more of the blackberry and spice things. So within the same grape, on the same property, made the same way every year, you get this wide range. And Zinfandel is the one that will tell you what the year's been like.
Right. So there is consistency from vintage to vintage and yet variation at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah. So in all the years you've been doing winemaking and harvest, do you have any good luck rituals before harvest is about to start?
No, I think the cellar crew just does their usual preparations, and not that I can think of. We have a lunch. Like the guys get together and we have like a pre-harvest right before harvest, and then we have a post-harvest. Yay, it's over, that kind of thing. And everybody gathers together. So it is a fun. And in fact, Monse, our winemaker, she'll make paella at the end of the harvest, and it's always delicious.
So those are traditions.
Yeah.
Any signs or omens you look for to tell you when harvest is about to start?
Well, has to do for in my mind, and I'm not a grape grower, but I always hear about, veraison. And when you have veraison, it's going to be it's like, the groundhog sticking his head out there, 6 weeks to harvest, typically. Now, a couple of things could change in that 6 weeks. The weather could have a huge cool down, and then of course it just extends it a little bit. But that's a rule of thumb for us.
Yeah, I have actually a really good indicator that tells me whether it's going to be a fast, crazy harvest or slow and leisurely, and that is if my brother-in-law is running around like a chicken with his head cut off, I know it's going to be a fast harvest.
Because he's our vineyard manager, so he's the guy.
He's your omen. So you were saying before, how could you pick a wine because it's like picking your children? Do you therefore talk to your children, whether they're on the vines or when they're in the barrels? And if so, what do you say to them?
Oh, I don't know that I actually talk to them, speak to them out loud, but the joy, we have a big old dog that we take for a walk several times a day here on the ranch and comes to work with us every day. And to be out there and to see your children, they're reborn each year when you see that first furry little bud break through. And then 3 weeks later, there are these magnificent leaves. And 3 months later, now you've got grapes that are, getting a little bit of color. And then the next thing you know, they're softening up. And the next thing you know, they're being picked. So it's really, watching maybe is a better analogy there than talking to them. But seeing your children mature is really quite wonderful.
I can just see how his heart is filling up with pride as he talks about that.
And I'm more of a talker because it has to do, I don't go down into the cellar too much, but like Ed was saying, we do walk the vineyard almost every day. Yeah, we do. And so I go out and I check it out and I go, oh, look, there's such a nice crop. Thank you. It's just, I'm thankful for that vine being so hardy. Some of our vineyard here on the property is few vines are over 100, and there are others that are way up on top of the hill where the soil is poor, and they've had to do some work. So I do go out there, and I don't know because talking to plants, who knows if it works, but if it does, hey, I tell them good job.
And being in that each day gives you an amazing sense of gratitude. It's easy to come to work every day and you're just coming to work every day. And when you take the time to walk around in the vineyard a little bit and to remember what a magnificent thing this is, that we get to watch this cycle every single year. Mm-hmm. It's really, really quite wonderful. And I'm just looking up here at the photographs thinking those are each about their time to be harvested. So
I know you have a lot of pride in the work you do, and you love what you do. But when you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up?
My mom and dad had a little diner, a little coffee shop. And I grew up working in the restaurant, and I thought I was going to be a fry cook and restaurant owner for the rest of my life.
I actually wanted to go into the publishing world. I wanted to be an editor because I loved reading. From the first time I was able to read, I just consumed books one after the other. So that's what I would be doing if I weren't here at the winery.
And how do the two of you spend your free time when you're not working? What do you do?
Well, we travel even a little bit. We go to a place up in the mountains to get away. So it's we call it our St. John's Rest. So we have a little place up there, and that we were just there this weekend to get away. And we've been lucky enough to we have a sister. His sister lives in Hawaii, and we go over there about once a year. So we were able to kind of take time off. Ed likes to beach sit. I like to kind of go and do more things, but I've learned beach sitting is actually okay.
We both love to kayak we do lake kayaking. We have a little motorboat that we also take a picnic out and spend the evening out on the lake once or twice a week during the summer. And we both do enjoy travel. We very much enjoy casual dining out, finding places that we enjoy and going doing that. As we are now a little beyond our mid-30s, we've probably slowed down a little bit and take things a little bit easier, but it's just, and enjoy the outdoors. I mean, there's just a lot we live in a wonderful area, so you don't have to go far.
Yeah. And when you have those romantic evenings, what is the wine you start with, or what wines would you be ordering?
Wow. What to start with? Okay.
I should say for a romantic evening. To make it romantic, what would you be?
We almost will always start with a glass of bubbles. I mean, that's something Julie really enjoys. And we've taken actually a lot to doing, if we're out for dinner, we'll do wines by the glass because we can try several different wines and things like that. And we really enjoyed that and that kind of.
Yeah. I agree.
Well, it's good because it would be a romantic evening for the two of you. So. Do you guys have a favorite film dedicated to wine?
The Goodyear is one of my favorites, actually. It comes the closest, I think.
With Kevin Kline. Yes?
Is with Russell Crowe. Yes. I was like, which actor was that? Yeah. Yes. I like that one because it had to do with family. Mm-hmm. So I think it touched a few things for me.
No. I've worked in the wine business all day long, every day. Movies about it is not something I seek out.
Fans of any particular sports teams?
San Francisco Giants.
Yeah. Go Giants.
So if the Giants win, what bottle of wine would you give them to celebrate?
Zinfandel.
Courage, Zinfandel.
Courage, Zinfandel. There you go.
What is the best piece of advice you ever received?
I'm just trying to think. Oh, you know what? Well, and it has to do with my husband. He's sitting right here. He told me, just tell your story. And that's what I try to do when I go out and talk about our wines, is just tell the story as it relates to me growing up. I mean, there are just so many stories behind growing up and being able to grow up here at the winery and having, my office is my old bedroom that, our family home got turned into our offices. And so the same bedroom that I grew up in is the one I look out every day. So we'd have a problem speaking to people, small groups, big groups, whatever. And once I got that advice, just to tell your story, just to tell you, and it relaxes you. And I've told other people to do the same because it is, public speaking is not something people love to do, in most cases. So yeah, that's it.
Well, you're obviously a good giver of advice. What about you? What's the best advice you've gotten, Ed?
Yeah. I think, and I'm trying to think here, in my former career, I was in selling winery equipment and supplies like corks and wine caps and things like that. And my first really big customer, I was told to ask my customers how often they wanted me to call on them. And so I asked Flo, I said, how often do you want me to call on you? And she said, you can call on me once a day, once a week, once a month, or once a year, as long as you know I have a problem before I know I have a problem. And that advice, just across the board, and I think her point was know your customer, know your business, and pay attention to it. And I think that was probably the best professional advice I ever got.
That's very good advice. I like that. I want to ponder on that. But while I ponder on that, I want to know if there's any advice you'd like to offer our listeners today.
Yes, I would say enjoy the bottle of wine that's in front of you for what it is, not what you wish it was. And don't let it be the center of attention. Pay more attention to the people around it than the bottle itself.
And I think every wine, just since we're speaking about wine, I think every wine you try, there's a story there. And so discover the story, whether it's a story that you're going to begin or a story that's already in progress. But there's just, with every glass of wine, just know that there's a story behind it.
What would you both say is your proudest achievement in your work to date?
Wow. Getting to work every day?
Well, to work in a family business and to be able to just go out and tell people about it, just about this 90 wonderful years that we've had here on the property, and to, highlight each and every one of the family members who have done so much to get us to this point, to get me at this point.
Actually, I do know what my proudest achievement is. I don't know that it's my achievement, but I've had the joy of watching it happen. And that is having come to work for the family business 14 years ago or so, and being Julie's ally in trying to let her voice be heard and develop her own story and be able to articulate it in a way that engages others. Sort of championing her and watching her blossom has been the greatest joy of my professional life.
That's beautiful. So, tell me something. Complete the sentence. A table without wine is like...
I'm sorry, I don't understand this concept.
It is like a day in a hot desert without water.
Okay, so the paparazzi are out. They take a photo of a VIP at a restaurant, and in the back of the photo is a bottle of your wine sitting on the table. Who would that VIP be? Who do you want drinking your wine and captured?
How about Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn?
Wow.
Those are two, but...
Well, they're a pair.
Yeah.
See, I would have thought Julie would have said Mel Brooks.
Oh, I would, yeah.
Let's think about this. The guy from Sideways, Paul Giamatti. How about that?
Got to turn him on to Zinfandel.
Exactly. That's exactly where I was going.
Do you guys think we'll be drinking wine in 300 years or 500 years? And do you think we'll be drinking the same thing we're drinking now, same grapes?
I think, I know we'll still be drinking wine because wine is going to always be part of our culture. But the grapes themselves may change because, as we know, 500 years will bring some change weather-wise. When you look at there's a wonderful writer, John Hager, who talked about the season or the centuries in Europe that changed. For instance, 1100s was a heat wave for like a century, and the 1800s brought a mini ice age. And so all of that, when you look, and that was, if we look back, that was a couple of hundred to more than 500. So looking forward, we're going to see some of the same things. And in fact, winemaking changed because of those two things that happened in Europe. So I would imagine if I were to go forward 500, yes, I think there will be some changes in what varietals will do well, or winemaking techniques. One of the two would change.
And I'm going to send you guys, you're a pair, so you won't be alone, but you're going to a deserted island. What are the 3 wines you take with you? Compromise now.
This is one of my favorite fun questions to ask. But I ask it is, you're restricted to one variety of grape. Which grape variety?
I'm more generous. I'm giving you 3 wines.
Well, so I'll answer it with one grape. I would say Pinot Noir, because I can have bubbles, I can have rosé, and I can have red wine.
That's a good answer and a good trio to have.
Well, I get 2 more?
You get your own 3.
I would do Sauvignon Blanc, I would do, let's see, Sauvignon Blanc, Sangiovese, and Zinfandel.
Ooh. No champagne.
Well, I thought he took care of the bubbles.
Oh, okay.
I'm bringing the bubbles. So.
You're very lucky to be a pair. Most people get 3 wines, you get 6. So what's one winemaking area in the world that you guys still want to explore?
I would love to go to New Zealand.
Interestingly enough, Julie and I have never gone on a wine exploration trip. In all of our travels, it's never been for the wine industry. I mean, it's never been to visit a wine region for the wines. Huh. We've gone there for other reasons. I would like to visit South America. Yeah.
I think you guys have some planning to do.
I think so.
So before we go, one more question. This is our fun game we do with Wine Soundtrack, music and wine. Just tell me a few, I'll list a few wines out there, things that you've talked about over the last few minutes, and you tell me what music is conjured up or what you'd want to listen to or start singing. So let's start with Paul Roger Champagne.
I would say it would need to be probably Beethoven's Fifth. I think that would be perfect.
Okay. What about your Sonoma blend that you make?
Classico. I'm thinking some good Hank Williams classic country music.
Okay. Yeah. Dry Creek Zinfandel.
Well, I'm a little partial to Queen, so I would have to say Bohemian Rhapsody. Would you agree with that?
I would go with that. Yeah, definitely go with that.
And Sauvignon Blanc.
I think that would be, what is her name now? I can't remember. She's got blonde hair. She's a country singer. Well, Faith Hill.
Faith Hill.
Yeah.
Okay.
Something by Faith Hill, yes.
And going back to that memorable wine you had, the Chateau Yquem.
Well, that's got to be an Aretha Franklin song. I Can't Stand the Rain Down My... What?
Yep, go ahead.
Bringing back sweet memories.
Yes, bringing back sweet memories.
Well, before we go, I want to thank you guys, Julie, Ed, thank you so much for joining us at Wine Soundtrack. But can you just let our listeners know where they can find you, where they can find your wines? Just remind them.
Mm-hmm. Well, go to our website, Pedroncelli.com. You can either buy it direct, or we have our wholesalers listed there. If you're looking around the states or the world, we'll have that listed there as well.
And people can come visit you here?
Absolutely. Daily, 10 to 4:30. Close major holidays, but otherwise here. And always happy to have groups of people come by and let us know, and we'll be happy to set up a special tasting for you.
Great. Well, thank you guys again for joining us here at Wine Soundtrack, and cheers.
All right. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.